today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this. Sky Nicolson took to Facebook to express her curiosity about the upcoming Serrano versus Hardy rematch, saying, wants the big money fights, in reference to Amanda, yet is fighting Heather Hardy next, who she beat clearly 4 years ago, who also turned down fighting me at MSG earlier this year because she, quote-unquote, can't make featherweight anymore, and is now fighting Serrano at featherweight.
A few passing thoughts. Sky Nicholson's been making friends all over the place. Amanda Serrano, Tiaria Brown, now Heather Hardy.
Here's the thing that most don't understand about that rematch. Here's the thing that some of the critics, like Sky Nicholson, don't want to understand. Amanda Serrano and Heather Hardy are both veterans of the sport, from a time when there weren't that many big opportunities for either of them, not that much money. This is before the networks came into it.
There's a solidarity there that some of the fight fans and even some of the fighters themselves, like Sky, aren't gonna understand.
Heather Hardy and Amanda Serrano have suffered through the same hardships as female pugilists before the sport became what it has become, and that spawns a solidarity that only they will understand. The rematch may seem pointless to some,
But Amanda, in her own words, is only affording Heather the same opportunity that she afforded her years ago. She's returning the favor.
you either get it or you don't. Some people don't.
The ones who don't, like Sky Nicholson, they're critical. And to those criticisms, Heather Hardy had this to say.
Bitch, they offered me 25 G's to get down to featherweight in 6 weeks with no belts. Fuck out of my face. You got literally nothing I want. You weren't worth going on a diet for, Sky.
That settles that.
For Heather Hardy, who's been in the game a very long time, getting back down to 126 pounds where she used to reign as WBO champion, you have to make it worth her while because it's a big cut.
She hasn't made that weight in years.
6 weeks of preparation for only 25 G's ain't worth Heather Hardy's while. At least it wasn't when she rejected the fight, and it seems that time has proven her right because she's landed an even bigger opportunity on a bigger show. She'll be fighting Amanda Serrano for the second time on the undercard of Jake Paul versus Nate Diaz.
She's likely going to make more money boxing Amanda for a second time than what she would have made boxing Sky.
And it's for all the marbles, all of the belts at 126 pounds. If nothing else, one fight is a title fight for every single title at the weight, and the other,
It's for no title at all, and they're paying you like you're just some opponent.
Amanda Serrano stated, Heather gave me a shot when I needed it. She didn't have to, so now I'm in a position to honor my word, plus B is tough as hell. It's worth the scrap. I get it. I'm not mad at Sky. She's a young fighter on the come up trying to get a shot. Everything in due time, though, to which Sky Nicholson herself replied, respect, champ. Hope to meet in the ring one day soon.
I've seen the critics, and what they tend to forget is that Amanda Serrano's coming off a hand injury.
Amanda is easing herself back into activity with a familiar face that she has fought before. And
Given what happened in the Taylor fight,
Chantel Cameron versus Katie Taylor fight this past weekend, Katie lost, so it's not like we were on the eve of a Serrano versus Taylor rematch.
wasn't going to happen anyway because now Katie's running it back with Chantel, which I told you could happen if Chantel wins.
Now, as far as Sky Nicholson, Amanda Serrano, and Heather Hardy, Heather, who's not one for taking anything lying down. I've spoken to her at least once before, and she's fiery.
She's scary.
Skip me. You don't want to go throwing Heather Hardy's name around any old kind of way, making it seem like somehow Heather was intimidated.
It's the principle of the thing. You're going to get all the way back down to featherweight, a very difficult weight to make for only 25 G's?
In a non-title fight opposite the ring, the house fighter, who we all know Matchroom is very much invested in.
Had things not worked out the way they worked out, had Heather not landed an Amanda Serrano rematch, then perhaps there would have been room for criticism. But she landed a bigger, better fight.
Literally.
This guy's making friends all over the place.
Now, if Heather Hardy decides to stick around beyond the Amanda Serrano fight, maybe Sky Nicholson can revisit that fight.
Improve on that offer because she ain't gonna make featherweight for any amount of money.
She's targeting Amanda Serrano, so if she can't get Amanda, she will at least face common opponents with Amanda.
Not a bad idea.
I think Sky's a good kid. I think people are a little bit too hard on her because she's ambitious.
Better than the alternative.
Like I said in my previous video, she has to curb her enthusiasm just a wee bit because she's ruffling one too many feathers in one too many places. In men's welterweight news, it's official. Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. agreed to a July 29th fight.
In this year, Unlike previous years, I felt that the fight would actually happen, could actually happen, because it has to. Errol's run out of alternatives to a Crawford fight.
Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. have agreed to a deal to fight for the undisputed welterweight championship on July 29th in Las Vegas at the T-Mobile Arena, sources told ESPN. PBC's Al Heyman, who advises Spence, and CAA's Ish Hinson, who advises Crawford, negotiated and will now deliver the most anticipated boxing match since the mega fight between Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao.
Maybe he means in terms of welterweights, 147-pounders?
Fight's gotta go down. It's gotta happen. Given what Showtime is going through with their parent company, Paramount Plus, that they're being merged into it.
2 rounds of layoffs.
Budget cuts, entire shows being canceled. Showtime trimming the fat in order to keep their head above water. The people at Showtime, the ones involved with boxing, they have to justify their continued existence in the sport. The best way to do that is to make the best fights possible.
To drum up the best metrics possible, to justify their existence, because if they don't, they'll get the axe.
They might. Crawford and Spence will each earn 8 figures guaranteed for the Showtime pay-per-view fight, sources said. And there's a bi-directional rematch clause that the loser can trigger within 30 days after the fight. It's a 2-fight deal for Crawford, with PBC sources said. After the probable return between Crawford and Spence, which must take place before the end of 2023, both boxers are expected to move up to 154 pounds. If they split the 2 fights, a trilogy fight is overwhelmingly likely, and whoever comes out on top is expected to push for a shot at the undisputed junior middleweight championship, which is currently held by Jermell Charlo.
We're getting ahead of ourselves.
We don't know if 2 to 3 fights from now Jermell will still be campaigning as a junior middleweight, and even if he is, we don't know for sure that he'll stay undisputed champion given the proliferation of mandatories he's got.
Proliferation of mandatory Spence has got as well. You got to think about that.
The deal concludes years of Crawford and Spence circling one another as the world's 2 best welterweights without actually stepping in the ring. But now, they're set to meet in one of the biggest fights the sport can offer, a matchup that will decide supremacy at 147 pounds and lend the winner a claim as the best boxer in the world regardless of weight. Already, Crawford is ESPN's #1 pound-for-pound fighter, with Spence 3 points behind him at #4, though that's not unanimous.
Terrence Crawford ain't the consensus #1 pound-for-pound fighter. To some people, it's Usyk. To others, it's Canelo. To some, it's Inoue.
Spence, who was slated to move up to 154 pounds for a summer bout against Keith Thurman, both Spence and Crawford were determined to fight each other next. The fighters met in March and came to an agreement on big-picture terms.
They want to turn this into a trilogy.
Like they did with Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury, minus any involvement from Top Rank, who used to promote Terrence Crawford.
I'm suspicious of the PBC's business practices. I still am.
I would feel better if it were a co-promotion in order to ensure that Terrence is being taken care of.
Errol's the house fighter.
He's the one they're invested in. And for a perspective, you saw what happened a week ago with Rolly Romero and Ishmael Barroso. That's what happens when they're invested in a fighter.
Brazen chicanery.
Corruption. Integral to the deal were the fighters' respective advisors, Heyman and Hinson, who have a long-standing relationship, working together on the 2nd and 3rd heavyweight title fights between Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder. And now, another super fight is on the horizon, pitting Crawford and Spence in a fight that fans have waited years for.
And we have, but the PBC's shows, the PBC's cards, and their business practices often read to me like scripted dramas tantamount to WWE.
Sports entertainment, because there's no reason for Rolly Romero to stand here today as a champion, but they made that happen.
Like I said they would.
By any means necessary.
Errol's out of options. For years now, he has sought out alternatives to a Terrence Crawford fight. Alternatives to the fight that they were asking him for. But now he's kind of painted himself into a corner.
To where this is the only big fight he can have. This is the biggest fight you can hope to make anywhere in between 147 and 154 pounds. That whole deal about him fighting Keith Thurman, that wouldn't have yielded much of a return. That's not a fight that fight fans are asking for, and it's about time that the people at Showtime
make fights people want to see.
They had a lot of success with the Gervonta Davis versus Ryan Garcia fight earlier this year, an estimated 1.2 or 1.3 million pay-per-view buys. Will this fight bring in what that fight brought in.
I don't know.
But I do know, at least I do think, it'll bring in substantially more than a Keith Thurman fight would have.
Nobody wants to see that.
The welterweight division and action within it has been all but frozen because the two guys holding all the belts aren't fighting each other, and they don't seem too interested in fighting anyone else. I took it as a good omen, a good sign, that Alexis Rocha, Terrence's mandatory challenger by way of the WBO, went his own route.
He's got a fight coming up. I think it's this weekend.
After the WBO issued that order for Terrence to fight Alexis Rocha, negotiations didn't work out, but I noticed that they didn't strip him.
Alexis found himself a dance partner, and the story was Terrence had entered negotiations, re-entered negotiations with Errol Spence Jr.
This year, unlike previous years, I was confident that the fight would happen and could happen because it has to for the both of them. It's the biggest fight left on the table for both Errol and Terrence. There are no alternatives.
And Showtime Boxing is under pressure to perform, to deliver big metrics.
Big fights, lest they end up on the chopping block like that wave of employees they just laid off.
My pick still stands. I still have Terrence winning the fight. I thought he would beat Errol Spence Jr. back when Errol was a more active fighter.
I already had him knocking out Errol before the car accident. After the car accident, now that Errol is less active and more injury prone, he hasn't fought in a year.
It's been a year since the Ugas fight.
Whereas Terrence has seen action in the last 12 months. He was in action late last year opposite the ring David Evanesian.
Still got Terrence winning this thing.
They've got to fight. It's the biggest fight for the both of them. Nothing else makes sense at this point.
So Terrence can't leave it to the judges. Terrence has proven to be one of the strongest finishers in the welterweight division. Since he got there, he's knocked every welterweight he's fought out.
He's got to knock out Errol. If you don't want to get caught up in no funny business, he's got to stop this guy. I think he can. Finally, on a smaller scale and at a lighter weight, Top Rank has a summer blockbuster of their own set to go down later on in the summer. Emmanuel Navarrete versus Oscar Valdez is set for August 12th in Glendale, Arizona. Oscar's neck of the woods.
They're both fighters of Mexican descent, they are, but Oscar, he's a native to Arizona.
With one more win under each of their belts since their planned February meeting fell through, Dan Raphael reports and Dake Jonovan confirms that Emmanuel Navarrete will defend his WBO super featherweight title against Oscar Valdez on August 12th at Glendale, Arizona's Desert Diamond Arena.
Oscar was last in action this past weekend on the undercard of Devin Haney versus Vasil Lomachenko.
Opposite the ring, Adam Lopez for the second time. I think he looked a little better in the second fight than he did in the first. I remember he had a hard time with Adam in the first fight. He actually got knocked down.
He was new to the weight.
Now that he's got a little bit more experience as a super featherweight, I feel like he got off to a better start this past Saturday. And Adam, he made things difficult in spots with his height, length, and movement.
But Oscar won the fight, and he looked all right.
Emmanuel Navarrete and Valdez were slated to square off for the then vacant title, which Shakur Stevenson took from Valdez before losing it on the scales. When Valdez withdrew due to injury, Navarrete warred his way past Liam Wilson, while Valdez returned this past weekend with a decision over Adam Lopez. Though both sit high in the rankings and aren't in any danger of falling from grace anytime soon, they are in need of impressive performances. Navarrete struggled badly with Wilson, at one point hitting the deck and benefiting from an abnormally long grace period, and Valdez failed to shine in that decisive but unspectacular victory over Lopez.
Yeah, Oscar looked all right this past weekend, but it wasn't a spectacular showing.
I wouldn't write him off, though. I wouldn't write off Oscar's chances because I remember in the build-up of what eventually became the Miguel Berchelt fight, Oscar wasn't looking good in the build-up of that fight.
But in that fight, he beat the odds, and he beat Miguel Berchelt in sensational fashion. This fight between Oscar and Emmanuel, it boils down to styles for me. Emmanuel Navarrete, much like Miguel Berchelt, is a mid-range to inside pressure fighter.
One of the nuances that Emmanuel has had working in his favor is that, when he was campaigning at 122, 126, he was unusually big for a super bantamweight or a featherweight, whereas at super featherweight, not so big. We saw that in the Liam Wilson fight.
He doesn't have the same ring coverage. He doesn't tower over all of his opponents the same way that he used to.
Emmanuel used to get away with things like leaning over his lead foot while lunging in to land a shot. Punches that aren't necessarily defensible punches, but because he was so tall for those lower weights, he was able to make those mistakes and get away with them. Emmanuel's defense is basically his offense.
Couldn't get away with all that stuff with Liam Wilson. He got knocked down in that fight.
Got counted a couple of times. He got nailed hard, got knocked down. Liam Wilson, an unusually tall guy for super featherweight.
Emmanuel didn't have a height advantage over Liam Wilson the way he usually has over many of his opponents down there at super bantam and feather.
It was just a different gravy for Emmanuel, that's what it was. Opposite the ring, Oscar Valdez, who's not the tallest super featherweight, much like Emmanuel. He's a guy who moved up in weight, but he's a guy who moved up in weight a while ago. He's got experience at this weight. He's fully acclimated.
Brawlers don't really bother Oscar that much. Not these days. Brawlers don't bother him so much as boxers. Boxers like Robson Conceição or Shakur Stevenson, whereas Emmanuel, he's more of a brawler than a boxer.
It's a pressure fighter. Oscar don't gotta go out there trying to find that guy. He don't gotta look for him. Emmanuel's gonna bring the fight to him.
Same way Miguel Berchelt did.
Oscar's a boxer-puncher. Emmanuel's a pressure fighter. Boxer-punchers have a stylistic advantage over pressure fighters because they ain't gotta find him. They'll get all the countering opportunities they need.
It's what we saw in the Amanda Serrano versus Erica Cruz fight. That's what we saw in the Oscar Valdez versus Miguel Berchelt fight.
The Miguel Berchelt fight, it was Oscar that was moving lateral, working off his jab, and walking Miguel Berchelt into counter shots. Not a guy that he has to go out there looking for.
He ain't got to do that with Emmanuel either. If Emmanuel stays in character, and I think he's going to be that same aggressive, explosive fighter that he usually is, but it will be to his detriment. I give the edge to Oscar Valdez, who perhaps didn't look spectacular this weekend.
But he wasn't looking spectacular going into the Berchelt fight. And we saw what he did to Miguel Berchelt. He was the betting underdog going into that fight, just based on the styles. I like Oscar Valdez to win, and he might win by way of knockout.
It feels like it's almost a guarantee that this fight ends by way of knockout.
It does.
Either Oscar gets knocked out or Emmanuel.
An all-Mexican shootout that harkens back to Mexican wars like Morales versus Barrera.
In this era.
No, I don't fault anybody who's going with El Vaquero. I don't fault anybody who's picking Emmanuel Navarrete to win this one. But just based on styles, I like Oscar to win.
Both tough guys. Both have been knocked down before, had to pick themselves up off the canvas, rally back.
Both guys that moved up from the lower weights. You know, Oscar, he's a multi-weight champion, the same as Emmanuel.
But Oscar's got more experience at this weight.
In tandem with the styles of the fighters and how they operate, slight edge to Oscar Valdez in what is an even contest, an even fight.
I think it's the styles of the fighters that'll separate them.